Here's one that all my right-wing and conservative fellows and my geopolitical folks will enjoy, or maybe not. This is from the Atlantic in August. The choice facing a declining United States. America can try to hold on to a global hegemony as it slips from its grasp, or it can learn from Britain's mistakes. This is from the head of communications at the World Economic Forum. So not some bullshit organization. In Nairobi National Park, a succession of concrete piers rises over the heads of rhinos and giraffes, part of a $13.8 billion rail project that will link Kenya's capital with the Indian Ocean. It's a project with the ambition of scale of global leadership, and the site safety posters are in the language of its engineers and builders, Chinese. 400 miles further north, in one of Kenya's city-sized refugee camps, there's another sign of what global leadership used to look like. Sacks of split peas, USAID, a handful of young, quiet Americans working on idealistic development projects. I saw both this month, but one already looks like a relic of the past. The baton of global leadership is being passed from the U.S. to China. In Africa, the evidence is everywhere. China will put nearly $90 billion into the continent this year. The United States, nothing close. China is betting on big economic partnerships and dependencies along its Silk Road, christened One Belt, One Road. The U.S., meanwhile, spends many of its dollars on expensive wars, to the detriment of soft power projects like USAID or domestic welfare programs like Medicaid. America's global influence is certain to decline relatively in the years ahead. It is the inevitable consequence of the return of the Middle Kingdom. As that happens, the U.S. should be more deliberate about the policy choices it makes. It's a lesson I've seen my own country, which was once an empire too, learn the hard way. On the way down from global hegemony, Britain came around too slowly to investing in domestic welfare. The U.S. should apply those lessons sooner. The time is ripe. The 45th president swung to power on the backs of voters worn out by the burden of expensive wars, tired of wartime austerity, and fed up with the rising inequality. America has spent nearly $6 trillion on sustaining long-running conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. Median wages haven't gone up in decades. Its healthcare inequality is a byword in failure. Infant mortality better than that of developing countries. In some states, death rates are soaring because of diseases of despair. It's clear that many voters gave up on the American empire when they voted in 2016. They didn't care for the international institutions the U.S. had so carefully constructed after World War II, NATO, the United Nations, the World Bank. They didn't care for their country to protect the liberal world order, to lead the free world. Voters on the left and right showed their readiness for a policy turn inwards. They wanted a country focused on domestic policies. These are my views and not those of my organization. A similar thing happened in Britain after the World War II. In 1945, the Labour leader, Clement Attlee, campaigned on bettering the lives of Britons at the bottom. He promised welfare over warfare, a national health service, social security, public housing. It won him the election, scoring an upset win against the man who had just brought Britain its finest victory in a global war, Winston Churchill. But the tumultuous years that followed, Attlee wasn't able or willing to fully scale down spending on the army and the empire. When Churchill came back after him in 1951, India and other colonies had already won their independence. But the overspending on foreign intervention and the military remained. The result was a delay of inevitable decline of the empire, but also a half-baked welfare system which couldn't provide for its citizens the promises that Attlee envisaged. During a series of international conflicts, the early 1950s to the early 1970s, Britain continued to lose not only territory in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, but also vast amounts of money and human capital, which could have otherwise been deployed to the betterment of its people. In Cyprus, Kenya, Oman, Yemen, the Suez Canal, the British possessions in Southeast Asia, and elsewhere, Britain spent vast amounts in a futile effort to retain some of its imperial power. I don't long for the days of the British Empire. My family spent its vainglorious reign digging ironstone from the ground. The imperial sun never shone down on the mine shafts of northeast England. But I know the end of the empire did not mean the end of Britain, or that of the well-being of its citizens. Quite the contrary, the Britain I grew up in provided me and my family with educational opportunities and health care we'd have never known had not Britain attempted to build a welfare state at home. Those of us on the global sidelines, America's anxious auxiliaries, know a collapse in the instruments of a nation's power when it happens. In Britain, that collapse was precipitated by the left's loathing of imperialism. In the United States, it has come from the right's loathing of globalism. America remains a global power, but in the world's capitals, policymakers are now puzzling out which alliances and organizations will shape the future. Entropy rules over empire. I've said that many times. President Trump posed in Churchill's armchair in a recent visit to Britain. A bust of Winston Churchill sits once more in the Oval Office. But in terms of America's position on the world stage, Trump's legacy may more resemble the one that Attlee set in motion. And Attlee is remembered and respected today not for empire loss, but for a welfare state founded. Now, he uses the welfare state. And I have a lot of right-wing people, conservative people, that are against the welfare mind state, okay? Even while they benefit from it. A lot of people assume that the welfare state, or the welfare mind state as we would like to put it, or socialism as they would like to put it, only helps people at the very, very bottom that don't want to work. And that is far from the truth. Your labor laws, your healthcare system, even as it exists right now, your public works that make your streets, all those laws that give you rights and privileges as an American are all built on the welfare mind state in its mildest form. And a lot of us are spoiled because we think what we get right now as American citizens, as individuals, just come out of nowhere. Because we didn't live 100 years ago or 150 years ago. Hell, even 80 years ago during World War II, a lot of stuff that we get now, we didn't get back then. Your government, your society, first job is to take care of its citizens. Without that, you don't have a society. Now, let's get to United States spending $6 trillion on wars that it probably shouldn't have been in because they didn't want to lose their position in the world, which is something that I said years ago. What this dude is saying, I've said years ago. Entropy rules over empire. That's Quigley speak for that the power will always diffuse out to the periphery. Now, I've said this in lessons over and over again, and basically, I really don't have to speak on it much more because this will become apparent. And as we head toward a singularity, it's going to become more apparent. You're going to see it for yourself. I don't have to talk on it anymore. This might be one of the few times that I will actually even speak on something like this. It's going to happen. How it happens is up to your government and up to you. How it happens is going to be up to you when you go to the voting polls. What do you want? And it's up for the American people to decide what do they really want. How do they really want to live? And how they're going to organize themselves. How you guys going to do it? I have no clue. But you're going to have to face this. Because what we're on is unsustainable. What we've been on for the last 20 years is unsustainable. And we're going to have to find firmer ground somewhere along the line. And this is just an international perspective pointing back at us and looking at us from the outside, from a former empire that went through the same thing. History doesn't repeat itself, but it damn sure does rhyme. And I'm hearing similar notes right now. On a bigger scale, very similar. But with that, that's all I got for this one. This is BGS out, and I will see you guys on the next one.